Today I'm going to share with you something that only the best poker players in the world fully understand. And that is how to never let your opponent win in the long run. Sounds too good to be true, right? Well, it's not. There is a GTO strategy that will result in your opponent never being able to profit in the long run. And it's called indifference. All you need is a little bit of simple math and pot odds. And if you put them together, you can make a magical concoction on the river that will result in your opponent never profiting. And I'm going to share that with you today. Let's get right to it. If you're ready, click the like and subscribe button, click the notification bell. Here we go. First things first, pot odds are very important. I can give you a quick, brief pot odds refresher. Your pot odds are the bet you're facing divided by the bet you're putting in, the amount you're calling, plus the pot, which is the bet you're facing plus the current pot. So for example, say someone bets $50 into a $100 pot. Okay? The bet is $50 divided by the bet, which is $50, plus the pot, which was the $100 pot before your opponent bet, plus the $50 that they just put in. So it'd be 50 divided by 200, which equals 25%. Remember, they bet 50 into 100. A 50% pot bet, we have a handy-dandy chart right here that will show you some very common pot odds you need to know. 50% pot means you need to realize at least 25% equity or more in order to justify calling. You need to have at least 25% equity to justify continuing in the spot. As your opponent bets smaller in proportion to the pot, you need less equity. You need to realize less equity in order to continue. As they bet bigger, you're going to need more equity to continue. If your opponent bets the size of the pot, you need to realize 33% of the pot or more in order to continue. If they bet 2 times the pot, which seems huge to some people, you only need 40% equity or more in order to stick around. Okay? Let's keep that in mind as we move forward. What is indifference? Well, indifference is forcing your opponent to have no preference between calling or folding. And you can do this by having a value to bluff ratio that equals the pot odds that you are giving your opponent. For example, if you bet $80 into an $80 pot, they need to win 33% of the time or more in order for the call to be profitable. This is on the river we're referring to. So if they need to win 33% of the time or more to continue, you can make them indifferent by bluffing exactly 33.3% of the time. And you do this by structuring your range logically. We're going to go through an example in just a second. If you bluff at the correct frequency, your opponent cannot profit in the long run, and your expected value will be equal to the current pot size. So, in that previous scenario, 80 into an $80 pot, you realize $80 worth of equity in the long run if you use this strategy. Let's take a look at an example of how to do this in game. Here we have pocket threes. We raise it up 50 big blinds deep from the hijack. The big blind calls, flop comes, jack of spades, 5 of spades, 4 of diamonds. Big blind checks. We continuation bet, 2/3 pot, 4,000 into the 5,900. The opponent calls, turns the ace of spades. The opponent checks again. This is a great spot to keep betting with flushes. King of spades X. And pocket threes and twos with a spade. Opponent checks. We go. 7,000 into the 14,000 pot. Opponent calls. River's the 10 of clubs. The opponent checks. Notice we have a bit more than the size of the pot. How much should we bet? Take a second, think about it. Well, this is a spot where we are going to want to blast it all in with a very polarized range of hands that are almost always good. That's going to be something like ace 5 and better. 2-pair and better, right? Good 2-pair and better. And flushes. If we're trying to be indifferent, we need to make sure we have some bluffs, as we do here. Pocket threes is a great hand to bluff. And in this scenario, if we structure our range appropriately, we will win the size of the pot on average. Sometimes you get called and you lose when you're bluffing. Sometimes you get called and you double when you have a value hand, but on average, we are going to win the size of the pot. Again, in this scenario, stack is 36,800. The pot is 27,900. The pot odds after the all-in, in this scenario, the opponent has to put in 36.8 to win a total of 101.5, which equals 36%. So we need to bluff 36% of the time exactly to make the opponent indifferent. So how do we do that? Step one is you want to start by choosing the minimum hand value that you would go all in with, which I just told you is probably something like ace 5 suited and better. And then you want to estimate the combinations of those value hands. This is going to take a little bit of practice, but with a lot of practice, it will become much easier. In this spot, there are 3 combinations of ace 5 suited, roughly 6 combinations of ace 10, 9 combinations of ace jack, roughly 9 sets, 10 straights, and 15 flushes, give or take. If you play around with a GTO solver, you will see this relatively clearly. We discuss this kind of thing thoroughly in the advanced tournament and advanced cash game courses at PokerCoaching.com. So check that out for a much more in-depth explanation. This is roughly 52 combinations of hands. Next, calculate how many bluff combos you can have, which is 52 divided by 52 plus x equals 0.36, right? Because we want to have 36% bluffs. That's how you figure out this ratio. And that's going to give you 52 divided by 52 plus 30 combinations. That will result in the opponent winning 36% of the time because we will then be bluffing 36% of the time. So then we need to choose our bluffing combinations. Well, we're going to have some just total junk hands in this situation, such as 7-6, 8-6, 9-8, 9-7, King 6, King 7, King 8, King 9, Queen 7, Queen 8, Queen 9, all suited. Now, you're not going to have these every single time. I'm going to estimate you have roughly 18 or so combinations of these. Remember, you had to bet the flop and then bet the turn as a bluff, right? A lot of these are going to be gut shots, gut shot straight draws for the most part. You're going to find that when the turn is the ace of spades in the spot, you actually get to bet very frequently with some low equity bluffs. And again, this comes from studying good, strong GTO strategies. So you will have some of these in your range. You're not going to bluff them every time, but sometimes. You're also going to have some combinations of King 9 offsuit, mainly the ones with the King of spades and the 9 of spades. And then we're going to have a lot of combinations of pocket 3s and 2s with the spade. And if that is how you structure your range, your opponent's going to be indifferent to calling or folding. So notice we have about 52 combinations of value, 30 combinations of bluffs in this scenario because we're betting a little bit more than the size of the pot. If we were betting a smaller amount, the opponent would need to win less often, right? And because they need to win less often, we then have to have fewer bluffs. Say, for example, we bet 50% pot all in on the river. In that scenario, the opponent needs to win 25% of the time. So then, if we had, let's say, 52 combinations of nut hands, we would want to have fewer than 30 combinations of bluffs because the opponent's just getting way better odds, right? So the odds you're giving your opponent will impact how many bluff combinations you have as you are betting bigger and bigger because your opponent is getting worse and worse pot odds. You get to have more and more bluffs. This is a bit counterintuitive. People think if they bet bigger, they need to have fewer bluffs because they don't want to take on risk, but that is not true. So that is it. That is how you never let your opponent win in the long run. It takes a lot of practice to master this skill. So practice, practice, practice. Going through GTO solver outputs will give you a very clear idea of what this looks like and how to structure your range in all sorts of common scenarios. And like I said, we discuss this thoroughly over at PokerCoaching.com. Each week, each day even, you should train your intuition by building ranges and focusing on structuring robust river strategies. So many poker players literally never bluff the river or close enough to literally never bluff the river. Almost all poker players, even a lot of the best in the world, don't bluff often enough on the river. Going back to our example here, some players don't bluff it all in with the pocket 3s and 2s. They think, maybe it wins at showdown, even though it never does. These are great bluffing hands, and you need to be bluffing with them. Some people take the 8-6 of diamonds and think, well, just going to check it back. They probably have something, which is true, But if you do that, you're not bluffing quite often enough. So as a general tip, we've discussed this on YouTube here a lot, when your opponents want to put in a whole lot of money, you should usually fold a little bit more than the game theory optimal strategy dictates, because most people don't bluff often enough. Many will, but a lot do not, right? You want to make sure that you are focusing on developing these strong strategies, because that is going to go a long way to helping you absolutely crush your opponents. And this is why you will find that at the highest stakes games in the world, many of the biggest winners are very, very, very studied in this aspect of game theory optimal play, indifference. If you practice and practice and practice, years will fly by, and eventually you'll be able to do this kind of based on intuition, which becomes super powerful, because then you find yourself in these spots regularly with a polarized portion of your range. You know you can make a big bet and win the pot on average. Winning the pot on average is nice. That's it for today. If you enjoyed today's video, again, click the like and subscribe button down below. Click the notification bell. If you have a friend who struggles with finding enough bluffs on the river, show them this video. They will be forever grateful.